In this video, we're going to discuss a very practical problem that comes up when using SPSS as a data analytics tool and a couple of different ways that we can go about approaching the solution. So, the specific issue that we're going to talk about today is that when I'm doing a big fancy analysis, say for a paper or for a dissertation, where I'm really trying to copy what somebody else did in their paper and understand it and make sure I can get the same results with the data. Um, in a point and click menu like SPSS, sometimes it can be hard to remember exactly what you did. So, for instance, today we're going to use a factor analysis, so analyze dimension reduction factor as our example. Now, you may not be familiar with this analysis, that's okay. The reason I'm using this is because it has many options that are important to remember. So I'm going to pull the first 10 items and use them as my variables. And then I might include a variety of different descriptives. I might include a different rotation method, and I'm just kind of clicking things at random here. Maximum iteration, I'll set to 22. I'm really just assigning some of these values at random. I'll set this to 19. I want loading plots. I want scores to be saved. I want some different options. I want to suppress coefficients below 0.32. And then I click OK and run this particular analysis. Now, if I ever X out of SPSS again, and I'll actually go on and do this right now. I'm going to X out of SPSS completely, and then I'm going to reopen SPSS and try to look at this. So I've X'd out of SPSS. I'm going to reopen, analyze dimension reduction factor analysis. All of the things that I just clicked have been lost, and there's not a way to get them back. That is, if I try to remember what options I selected here or here or here, that there isn't a way to find those, and it can be really difficult and time-consuming and tedious to record all of that information. Additionally, that output file that I closed is now gone, and there's also no way to recover that. So what we're going to talk about is how can we save the details of the analysis you run and save the output so that we can access both of these values later. And again, both of these things can be extremely important, say, if you wanted to record the results, the specific results that you're looking at and analyzing with your project for a collaborator, for your dissertation chair. If you're looking to share them with an article author who you're trying to follow up on their results, and how you can save the way in which you got to those results. So again, I'm going to select the first 10 items for this, and I'm going to be a little bit more slow with my selections. I'm going to keep the initial solution. I'm going to do a principal axis factoring rotation with a scree plot, a fixed number of factors of 3. I'm going to do a Promax rotation with a kappa of 4 and loading plots. I'm not going to save any scores, and I'm going to suppress coefficients below 0.32. So this is how I'd kind of standard run a factor analysis. And again, I know that as soon as I close this menu, or as soon as I close SPSS, all of this is going to be lost. But I might want to email exactly these details of all the things that I just clicked and selected to a professor, to a colleague, so that they could get exactly the results that I got every single time. Or if I had to go back and somebody asked me a question about how I got that, I wouldn't forget that, oh yeah, I suppressed coefficients below 0.32 instead of below 0.3 or something like that. I wouldn't forget any of the details. All of it would be saved. So how can I save a menu option? There's a couple potential ways. One of them is that you could write down literally every single thing you did. So I could pull up a Word document and go through each item that I included. I could go through each option and descriptives, or just kind of take a screenshot of each of these to show exactly what the details were. But SPSS actually has a better way built in. If you look down at these bottom buttons, you'll see that there's one that you may have kind of wondered what that meant, called paste. What paste does is it opens up the under the hood SPSS. So let me click it and show you what I mean. Well, SPSS is a point and click thing. That is, I can go to menus and select things to run. Under the hood, there's actually a lot of computer code that's going on within each of the options that I select. Clicking paste pastes the exact code for what I'm selecting. Now, in this class, we're not going to go through the details of the code. If you're familiar with computer code within another context, you might be able to look at this and piece together some of the different options I selected and match the code to it. And actually, there's some options available in the SPSS code that aren't available in the point-and-click menus, again, that we won't discuss in this class. The big way I do encourage you to use SPSS code, which is called syntax in SPSS, is to save the details of the analysis that you run. So for me, if I'm using analyses in SPSS, I might point and click and play around with the menus, and I'll run one and then another with all the different options until I find the option that I'm like and gives me the results that I'm interested in. And then once I find that, I will paste those final options into SPSS and save this syntax file. So I'll call this final analysis and hit save. Now, what's the use of this? Well, within this, I can rerun the same analysis every time, even if I close out of SPSS. Let me show you. To run analyses from a syntax file, I select the SPSS syntax code that I want to run. I click the play button, and then SPSS executes that just as it would if I'd hit the normal OK button. Now I'm going to X out of this output, X out of my syntax, and X out of my SPSS folder just as before. You'll see that I have an SPSS SPS file, which is the syntax file. I'm going to go on and open up my dataset again, and then use File Open to open a syntax file that's located on my desktop. When I click Open, you'll see that I have this exact syntax the same as before. Now, if I went to my Analyze, Dimension Reduction, Factor Analysis menu, none of my options are still there. And again, there's no way to recover them. But if I'm here within my syntax file, I can simply highlight the same syntax, hit the play button, and the analysis, exactly with all of the options that I had it as before, will run. I can't describe how handy this is in cases where you're looking to, again, replicate a analysis either later on. Let's say you ran an analysis and a few months later need to revisit it. If somebody, say a committee member, asks a question about it and you need to go get the details on it or rerun it with a new data set or with a couple of different variables, this is exactly the way in which you do that. Or maybe you want to share this information with someone else and be very explicit about all of the options that you selected when you ran this. An SPSS syntax file is a fantastic way to do it. All right, so we've run our analysis, but let's talk about how we can save edited output. Now, we've talked about editing output previously. We've talked about how we can go in and, let's say, within an analysis like this, I actually don't really care about my factor matrix, so I'm going to select that and delete it. I don't really care about my structure matrix. I only care about my pattern matrix. Factor correlation, I'll keep that. Factor plot and residual space, that's kind of handy. I'll keep that too. And maybe I don't care about this plot of communalities either, or table of communalities, so I'm going to delete that. Finally, I'll go up to my factor analysis, select it, and make it very big so that it's a title. This is my factor analysis with just the output that I care about and none of the extra output that SPSS gives me. Now, we've kind of referenced that you can do this type of editing before, but haven't explicitly talked about how we can save this output to be shared. There's a couple of different ways that I can do it. I could, of course, copy and paste this output into something like Microsoft Word. However, oftentimes, especially tables, don't translate very well into Word, and even some graphics are not particularly well rendered in a Microsoft Word setting. I do this if I'm trying to write a final report. Of course, I would paste this and then have quite a bit of formatting to do. But for something like just sharing raw results, typically it's nice to keep it in SPSS format, especially if I'm sharing this with someone who also has SPSS. Ultimately, I simply go to File and Save to save my output file. I'll call this Final Results and simply click Save to record these. Now, when I X out of all of my menus, including my dataset, I can see the final results.spv file, which stands for an output file. I can double-click the SPV file, and on my computer, if I have SPSS, this is just going to load the output. Note that I don't even need the dataset on my file to load the output. I can just see this raw output even if I don't have the data or the original syntax. Now, if I wanted to edit anything about this, say I wanted to go in and change the results to be a principal axis from principal axis factoring to something like a maximum likelihood factoring extraction method, that's not something I could do without my data or without my SPSS syntax file. But if I just want to share the output again with someone who has SPSS and can open these type of files, this is a handy way to do it. Of course, if you're sharing with someone who doesn't have access to SPSS, this is not a particularly good option because they won't be able to open the SPV SPSS output type documents. But when I'm looking for replicability and when I'm looking for convenience, especially with individuals who do have SPSS, saving your output selected with a couple of annotations to make things clearer and with all of the extra stuff removed is certainly the way to go. Well, in this video, we've talked about how we can save our menu options through using SPSS syntax to allow replicable analyses by either us later on our machine or another person who we want to send that information to. We've also talked about how we can save our edited output information and share that even to people who don't have our dataset, so long as they have SPSS to open that type of file.